And we're live. Welcome to the SoNo Show, episode 31, Ginseng Dreams and Ozark Streams. Today, this morning, I'm joined by a man named Western Masculine, a guy who I've wanted to speak to for a while. And finally, I guess it was about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I actually got in touch with him finally. And he has been kind enough to take time out of his busy schedule to come here and speak to us about his project of Ozarkia. The Ozark Mountains are an area that I have never been to myself. I'm a hillbilly after all. I have traveled very little in my life. I've never made it to Ozarkia, but I have learned over time that there's some commonalities between my beloved Appalachia and Western's beloved Ozarkia. For one thing, years ago, I used to enjoy hunting ginseng a lot. And back then, I labored under the delusion that ginseng was pretty much just an Appalachian thing until I happened to stumble across a video by, I believe it was Sigma Survival School. And he was digging ginseng, except he was all the way west over in the Ozark Mountains. So without further ado, how are you doing today, Western? Thank you for coming on here.
I'm great, man. I'm really appreciative for one that you reached out a few weeks ago and asked me to be on. And yeah, just glad to get on and chat with you. I've really enjoyed your streams. I think I told you I found your channel, I think in the fall of this last year, and did a bit of a binge on a lot of your shows. And I thought, man, this is the kind of guy I grew up around. Just the way you chat, the way you present yourself, and you got a unique background. And I thought, man, that's a guy I'd like to have a conversation with. I had the thought in my head, like, man, I need to get out and do another podcast to talk about Ozarkia. And the next day you message me and I go, man, what are the odds of that? So glad to be here.
Man. Yes. I call that synchronicity. I don't ignore those things. Yes.
So thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, well, it's an honor to have you. So I usually like to ask my guests a lot of the typical questions. What was it, I guess I should say, what was it that made you could say, racially aware? I know this is a standard question, but I'm always curious to hear my guests' different stories. What was the event for you that set you on this current trajectory, you could say?
Yeah, there's a couple stories that immediately come to mind, but the earliest one, the one that no matter the conditioning all of us have gone through in our lifetimes to the opposite, I spent 3 or 4 years of my early childhood in a black neighborhood. And I went to an inner city school from kindergarten through part of second grade. And I had black teachers. And I had a black school principal. I had a black school board. So mostly blacks, some Hispanics, Mexicans, Guatemalans. But that experience of being usually the lone white person in a sea of non-whites, that stayed with me forever. And so thankfully, my parents decided it's better to be a poor person out in the rural area in a country, with a little bit of acreage than it is to be a poor person in the middle of an inner city. And people think, the black parts of town only are like in places like Detroit or Baltimore or LA or something like that. But almost every major city across the Midwest and South has, a part of town that's black.
Yeah, just a little black population, a little, I wouldn't say it's segregated, but, people, they tend to congregate around their own. That's just how it is. And the government with civil rights and whatnot, they always try to always force us all together. But, yeah, man.
But the strongest teacher of understanding that we're different is just living around them. And so from an early age, I got that experience. That'll never go away. But then later in life, as I met my now wife, and we were living in a different area than I grew up in, and the demographics that were there, the demographic change that was happening where she's from, is different subgroups. It's Asian and Indian.
Really?
Right? Okay. East Indian, Dot Indian, right?
Yes.
And so you're kind of used to the boiling pot that you're in. And I'm not saying you like it. I'm not saying anyone doesn't understand. They don't enjoy that there's, Mexicans moving in or that there's blacks on one part of town. But what I'm saying is when you get put in a different boiling pot, and that pot is way hotter and with different recipe, different demographics that are replacing you, it sort of shakes it up a bit, and you go, okay, so this is happening everywhere. And as you start to move around, and I moved around to a few different spots for my career over the last 15 years, everyone you talk to has sort of a similar story. Yeah, when I grew up, it was a little nicer and there was less violence around these areas. And this used to be a good place to grow up. But now this, it's a little more violent, it's a little more this. You hear that story everywhere. And around that time, me and my wife had gotten married. We had our first baby coming on the way. And you start to think in terms of generationally, like, how do I set up my posterity, right? You're thinking less about yourself and more about your bloodline in the future. And so then it's not just something that you dislike. It's something you're like, well, why is this happening? Who's doing this? What's going to be done about that, right?
Yes.
And so I think ultimately, to answer your question, early childhood experiences all the way through to having our first child in an area that was pretty far advanced in terms of demographic replacement, where I think where we were, white people were maybe 35%. Oh, wow. And so the culmination of all of that made me start asking some questions, hopped online, made an account, and well,
the rest is history, you could say.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's something I've kind of harped on before. It seems now myself, I grew up in a very extremely rural part, up right near the northeast corner of Tennessee, and the demographic there it's 90. Let's see, just in my county alone back home, the population is still 95% white. So we didn't really have to deal a lot with diversity per se. But over the last, basically since the introduction of Oxycontin back in 1996 by Purdue Pharmaceuticals, the drugs.
Sackler family.
Oh yeah, the Sackler family. Yes, sir.
I like to say their name in relation to that instead of just their company name.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You got to point. I always like to point out too that they may have a skin color that is white, but they certainly are not white. You could say they are not Native European. They're of a certain tribe. But man, just seeing, and I mean, in my own life, I mean, I got caught up. I got into that sort of criminal lifestyle there for probably about 10 years when I started college up until just 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago. And I mean, the methamphetamine, even heroin was starting to rear its ugly head. And I'm sure there's fentanyl up there in that little mountain village now as well. And while we didn't have to deal so much with the diversity, just seeing the human wreckage that these sort of just the pharmaceutical companies introduced these open borders policies. I mean, back when I was into methamphetamine, I mean, the meth that I consumed, it wasn't made here in the United States. It was crystal. It came up from Mexico. These open borders, you start to understand. And I mean, when you see the human wreckage, it's and then, I mean, we all seen the race riots back in 2020, and that, I think that really shook quite a few people awake. I don't think it shook enough awake, but it woke some people up.
Yeah, I agree. That was an impetus for a lot of people to start to move out of the suburbs, out of the urban areas that they live in, and look for ways to live a more rural life away from both the COVID restrictions and diversity. It was like the combination of the two. And that was part of the impetus. We had always planned to make a move like this. Me and my wife, we've been talking about that for a while. We're looking at different places, but ultimately the combination of both of those things were like, all right, let's do it now. Let's not wait. Let's not wait till there's a perfect time. Let's not wait till everything lines. Let's get out of the city. We lived an hour outside of a city, so we weren't, downtown or even suburbs for that matter. But we had made that move about 5 years prior to our move here, and just wanted to get out of the city and raise our kids in a little cleaner, quieter spot. But over just those 5 years, you saw fresh off the boat Africans being brought into these areas. It's like, dude, there's no way they can afford it.
Yeah.
Like these aren't cheap spots out here. This is an African woman with like 5 kids with no husband. I mean, it's a cliche for a reason, but like they can't afford those properties out there.
Yeah, that's similar to what I've been hearing is going on around the country, you could say. What was I going to say? Do you happen to know what nationality the African woman you might have just mentioned was? Was she perhaps Nigerian, or is there? If you don't know this, I'm just curious if you
Yeah,
happen to know.
Nigerian or Kenyan is the two that I typically see
Man,
out where I was.
from what I understand, I think that I was just in my personal chat here on Telegram. They were talking yesterday, and I think by like 2070, Nigerians could be the most populous, the highest population of any ethnicity in the world. Uh, I don't know. I've not looked into this myself. I was just curious about that. That was just a fact that stuck with me.
Yeah, and it hit me that it must be an NGO or some sort of funding like that to get them to relocate it to the place they're relocating them to, because they're not relocating them to the slums of the inner city.
Yeah.
They're relocating them to suburban, even the edges of the suburbs in predominantly white areas.
Oh yeah.
Intentionally, right? But that's it. They're not just leaving Nigeria and going like, oh, I want to move to this, small off mid-sized town an hour outside of a city in the middle of, this state.
Yeah.
That's not how those things work out, right? There's not jobs and
They
accommodations
have
for them out there.
Yeah, they definitely have some sort of incentive to move out there. They've been
Mhm.
pushed out there, you could say, encouraged.
Yeah, like the Somalis being pushed into Maine, like the Somalis being pushed
Oh
into
God, yeah,
Minnesota, and different
absolutely.
white strongholds, right? They try to take the most potent biological weapon they can in some sort of African and drop them off in there. And
And
even
just
in small
leave
doses,
them to their
they wreak
devices.
havoc.
Yeah, it's just horrific, you know.
Yeah.
Man, like I said, I grew up extremely rural. And about 4 years ago, we moved to Southeast Tennessee. And at first, the first year or so, we lived in an apartment. Then we lucked up and we managed to get a house. We've only got about an acre of land here. I'm able to set up some raised beds, but it's in a neighborhood, I guess you could say. And man, I've got to say this: I am not a fan of the suburbs. I think that, which this is kind of a rural suburb, I guess you could say. The large city, it's about 15 miles from here, uh, the city limits. But man, I think the reason that our race, at least in America, are in the condition they're in, I think a big reason, sadly, is the suburb itself. I'm not a fan of suburban living. Uh, it just seems like a lot of the people here are just fake. They're just consumers. It's all There's nothing of substance, I guess you could say. Um, it seems like, in my opinion, the best out of our race either grow up extremely rural or they grow up. Excuse me, my voice is a little rough today. I'm trying to lose my voice, but they either grow up extremely rural or in a very rough urban environment, such as you came from yourself. If the Like in your case, you were not broken by growing up in such a rough environment, thankfully, and that, like you mentioned earlier, wakes up a lot of white people. Do you have any thoughts on the suburbs? Have you ever had to live in the suburbs by chance?
Yeah, I have. I did for, I don't know, 10, 12 years or so, before I met my wife. And then as we were kind of getting our family started to where we could, move out somewhere a little
Yes.
bit more rural. But yeah, I agree. I think I listened to one of your recent streams talking about Eric Rudolph and your
Yeah.
buddy and mutual acquaintance. I think Dies is how you say his name, his screen
Yes.
name.
Yes.
He mentioned the concept of moving from being a consumer to a producer. And that's such a bigger
Yes.
shift than it sounds like, because it's metaphysical. Like you're not just, the suburbs is a consumer mindset. It's a consumer life. It's
It
everything
is.
about it is just purely based off of comfort, convenience, and consuming, rather than doing what is inconvenient and what's a little more difficult, takes a little more time, costs you a little bit of extra, but you produce.
Yes.
And the feeling of accomplishment from a producing, like, my homestead that we've got out here, we're going to slaughter think 5 pigs this year.
Oh yeah.
I've got my first steer on its way, although it won't be butchered till the year after. We've had 2 hay harvests already. We've butchered, I think it was about 35 chickens this year,
Yeah.
and we get lots of eggs, right? And
Oh,
so
I bet there's an
that difference
abundance
of
of
like
them.
pulling in that bounty that you spent all that time working on, all that investment working on the infrastructure for those animals, feeding them, watering them during the recent freezes that we've had, where all the your water hoses and your little spouts that the animals drink off of are all frozen up. So you got a farmer's carry 5-gallon
Oh yeah.
buckets of water from the house out 100 yards to the pens and the barns. All of that culminates into just a different perspective, a little
Oh
more, a
yeah.
little more humble, right? And it's, I guess that it shows itself in a lot of ways, but one of the ways is just I guess you could call it fashion, right? Like
Yes.
Carhartt is really popular out here, but it's popular because of the utility, because it
Yes.
keeps you warm, because it doesn't catch on a fence
It's
line
tough.
and rip
Yeah, it's
really
really
easily.
tough
It's tough.
material.
It's
Very
inexpensive,
resilient.
but it's not viewed as being poorly dressed. In fact, some of the better dressed people in town wear a lot of Carhartt. Not just one brand,
Yeah.
but you get what I'm saying. Because production is the default instead of consumption, things are prioritized in such a different way, and people realize that what's convenient, what is comfortable, is not the priority. It's what is the
Exactly.
best outcome, and that translates to the way they raise their kids, the way they treat others, right? And the type of community you're raising your kids within, because it's a productive community and not a
Exactly.
consumptive one, which the suburbs represent.
Yes. And I mean, even I made a video. It was shortly after Thanksgiving. I posted a video. I went back home. I go back home, I try to go back home once every 3 months, check on my place there, just see the family. I went up there for Thanksgiving, and this was shortly after the stream that we did, talking about the early life of Eric Rudolph. And as I was up there, I went to my great aunt. She still lives on my great grandfather's farm, and I took a hike up to the top of the ridge there that overlooks the field and the holler. And I was thinking on the way up there that just the idea of becoming an area from production to consumption, this shift, it even happened in rural Appalachia. It happened within, well, not completely, but it happened within one generation between my great grandfather and my grandfather's generation. My great grandfather, he was in the Pacific Theater of World War II. He mainly farmed for a living. He didn't have a steady job per se, like at a factory or anything, because there was not a lot of industrialization in that part of rural Appalachia. Because I mean, the TVA, it only got started, I think, in 1932, and he just did odd jobs. He worked as a carpenter, did a variety of things. But he mainly lived off of his farming. He grew tobacco, raised Black Angus cattle, had some dairy cattle, and even when I was a child, as he was getting fairly advanced in age, he still, produced some of these things. While my grandfather, on the other hand, he was a boomer. He was born in 1947. And he worked most of his life he helped manage a furniture factory down in Johnson City, Tennessee. And, just in that generation, it's like it started to shift even in rural areas from production to consumption, sadly. And when this happens, I think it produces a lot of problems. When people are just consumers, I think subconsciously they feel that something is wrong, that life is supposed to be more than this, and they end up screwing up. You could say the drug problem among suburban whites is there. It's really hurt rural Appalachia. I'm just curious about Ozarkia. Do you have a lot of drug problems over there? Like, is it noticeable or?
You see it. I think we talked about this a little bit offline, but it's this segregation you see, at least in my region. Right?
Yeah,
That's all I can speak for. Is just
yeah,
within an hour's drive of me. You see this segregation of like the productive homesteading families with 4 to 6 kids that, grow their own food. They don't vaccinate their kids. They homeschool. They, um, yeah, prepare, and they don't let their kids watch television, or you just get on the internet
Dude, that's a big thing.
unmonitored, right? So there's those types of families, and I'd say around me, most of the people that own land, if they're under the age of 50, that would probably represent them, right? And then you got
Yes.
this other contingent, which I know exists because if you look in the local newspaper, there's arrests for methamphetamine pretty regularly. I don't know if it's every week, but pretty regularly in a small county, in a small rural county. So it exists out here. But when I take my kids out to festivals or go in town to shop or something, I don't really see much of it. But I hear from the other locals like, oh, it exists. They stay back in their haulers over on this part of the county, and
Yeah.
those that fall in with those crowd, they just end up moving over there too. So you just got a part of the county that's less desirable. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it doesn't exist. I know it does. I know there's some bad consequences of it. But what I always try to say is compared to what? And where
Yeah.
we were living and all throughout my life, there's druggies around. I don't know of an area in the U.S. you can move that doesn't have
Oh,
druggies.
no, it's
Suburbs
affected everybody.
are no
It's affected
exception.
everyone.
So it's not as if you get to choose to move to an area where there's no druggies. It's just it's trade offs, and this place has a lot of trade offs. But yes, I think meth, and you said earlier opioids, and I lost an uncle to opioids. He had a back problem. He was a
Oh,
manual
man.
laborer and hurt his back. Went to the hospital, and this is 15 years ago. They gave him OxyContin, and
Yes.
it didn't take many years and before he was in the grave after first being prescribed OxyContin. So those things have
You
hit home
know,
for me.
yeah, this is, and that's what was so malicious about, the promotion of Oxycontin when it first came out. It was heralded as something you can't get addicted to. It was like a wonder drug, of course. And they, prescribed it to hardworking people that, never had done anything like that. And then before you know it, they're addicts, they're, and even getting into heroin and other things. It's a fucking tragedy, to tell you the truth. Let's see here. Well, I figured, I'd try to ask you some about Ozarkia itself, your project. What gave you the idea to start this project? You could say.
Well, as I said, me and my wife, once we had, I think we were having our second kid, and she was pregnant. We were just like, where do we want to be? Where do we want to raise our kids? Like really thinking of what we want their childhood to be. And we were both on board. Like it needs to be out on some sort of land, growing food, raising animals, a garden,
Absolutely.
smaller population, right? More rural. Um, so that my children would grow up to be a similar person to myself, like similar in their way of culture, their disposition, their curiosity, their friendliness, their hospitality, their manners, right? All those things that you don't see living in heavily populated areas, diverse areas. So we were just looking around different spots, man. I mean, it was like, all right, well, obviously, let's look at the Pac Northwest. Let's look at Northern Idaho. Let's look at Western Montana. Hammer's got his thing up in Maine that's doing well and very much supportive of. I
Yeah.
heard some different spots. People were going to North Dakota even. But then, I heard about the Ozarks, right? And I thought, man, why didn't you even think of that? Because like I grew up on the plains, but not far from the Ozarks, right? And I had been there. I'd seen it before. I had a bunch of friends that went to camp there, trout fishing. There's a lot of outdoor activities, a lot of summer
Oh yeah.
vacations that families take. Nice lakes. There's Branson, Missouri is a big destination. It's like Christian Vegas out here. Yeah, so it's one of those spots where I thought, oh man, well, I can have the culture, that I wanted because it's kind of on the border of the Midwest and the South.
Yeah.
So you get something that's more aligned to how I grew up, the culture that I grew up with, the hospitality, the friendliness, the chattiness. You take your kids out with you to go to the store, and you get stopped by 3 or 4 strangers to chat you up, who compliment you on your children, and they have a little back and forth, and you go on. It feels more of a community and the culture that I grew up with and I wanted my kids to be a part of.
Oh yeah.
So we looked at that. I looked at a lot of different things, the demographics, right? There's a lot of areas you could look at in the states that are not a lot of areas, there's a shrinking number of areas, but there are some areas that are heavily white, right? But one of the things the Ozarks had that I saw is it's not just a large number, dozens and dozens of counties with demographics that are around 95% white. They're trending upward, and so it's been
Yes.
on a trend of solidly continually moving up. And just anecdotally, my own experience, that's been exacerbated during COVID. Since the BLM riots, a lot of white flight from people fleeing COVID tyranny and demographic violence from Texas, from Louisiana, from Mississippi, Alabama, as well as from the coast. I think people would be surprised. We've had a lot of interest, and a few people move here from both New England and the West Coast, but
Yeah.
similar reasons. So around here, it's not just that it was the last census, like it was, the general area ranges between 95 and 98% white around here, but it's the trajectory, the shift is moving to even wider. I wanted a mountainous region because I think for a lot of reasons, natural beauty, I like hiking, mountain biking, all that good stuff, right? Being outdoors.
Oh yeah.
But it also plays into, if you ever had to defend yourself, if your community, your tribe had to defend itself, this topology lends itself to a defensive effort.
Oh yeah. It's
So
easier to defend yourself in a mountainous terrain than just being out in the flatlands or the coast, you could say usually.
yeah.
There's just a quick question someone from the chat had. I'll post it here. They said, "Why can't I see the Ozarkia telegram on my phone?" You'll have, or
the
I'll let you
the
answer that.
Jew the Jews at Apple is probably the reason there. So I have an Android specifically because of Telegram. You can download the APK file. Basically, you can just download the app from Telegram's website, and it allows you to see all of the channels that aren't just permanently kicked off. And Ozarkia is not
Yeah.
permanently kicked off. But Apple, through their App Store, blocks any channel like ours gets a Google App Store ban pretty quickly. Our community, our
Yeah.
cause, the people within it used to just restart channels every month or so to get around that ban, and then they just catch another one. But eventually, you just like,
It
all right,
gets,
guys, you got to figure out a way to find us. You got to download the desktop version, or you got to get an Android and download the APK file, like the app from Telegram itself. But that's why you can't see our channel if you have an Apple phone, or if you're downloading from the Google Play Store.
yeah, I had I still have a channel called Southern Nordic on there, but it got banned in December of September of last year, about 4 or 5 months ago. And I started a new one, but I've been lucky with a new one so far. But I mean, it's just, it's inevitable. And one thing that's unfortunate is people will think that like Antifa or whatever goes around flagging your channels. This isn't always the case. I'm sure it happens some, but a lot of times the people that end up flagging your channel and doing this, snitch bullshit are people that you would imagine share your values. Unfortunately, this is something I've learned. There's a lot of spiteful people in this thing. It appears, you know.
Yeah, I've never really had any big issues with our enemies, so-called, like attacking me. Like I've had my channels taken down from them. Like they've definitely done that, but I've had way more attacks come from people that consider themselves part of our cause than I have from outside
Yeah,
of the cause.
it's just it's the truth. Sometimes it's like our own worst enemy are the ones that allegedly share our values. That's just how it is. I had no
Yeah,
idea it was
if you,
like this when I got into this a few years ago.
yeah, and if you don't mind, I'd like to at least give people just a succinct, like, what is Ozarkia? Because I do
Oh yeah,
get that question sometimes.
absolutely.
So Ozarkia is an intentional community made up of racially conscious white families. I want to highlight the word families. We require a husband, wife, and children. And we are working toward self-sufficiency within the Ozark region by establishing homesteads. And so the community that we've raised here, the families that have moved here, we raise our children together, we homeschool together, and we grow our individual and collective power within the region. We are not a top-down hierarchy. I'm not barking orders and demands at the other families that join. Each family relocating here has a say in our collective decisions. Our families bring up projects they want to put forward in our community. And this could be, they want to start a business. Someone wants to go try to push a candidate onto the school board, or they might want to run themselves. They might have a fencing or structural project they need to build on their homestead. And what this
Yes.
gives you is a community or a network of people of similar mind, of similar cause, raising their kids in a similar way to help you propel your own power within the region. And then collectively, each of us growing our power within the region has a benefit to everyone else within that intentional community. So that's in the nutshell what the Ozarkia project is.
Man, that's a great project that you've started. As I see it, our people, we are obviously in a state of decline, not only in
Yes.
population, but in physically. We're in a state of decline morally and spiritually, all these things. And for us to right the ship, you could say, is going to take a revolutionary mindset and revolutionary action. Now, a lot of people, I understand, they get frightened by the word revolution or accelerationism, words like that. And, I guess I understand this because it can be a fairly frightening concept. But when I talk about revolutionary action, I'm not necessarily talking, about, violence and things of that nature. There's what I consider cold revolution, which is just working on becoming self-reliant. Every time you rely on the system, you help the system. It's just a fact. And what you're doing right here it's a great example of what I would consider cold revolution, becoming self-reliant. It sounds like you're very well on your way to becoming self-reliant. You are in a much better position than I am.
But I want to make sure and pause you there and say I wasn't a year and a half ago.
Okay.
That's how quickly you can make a change to be where I'm at. I'm not where I need to be, and I never will be.
See, I like that you just said
constantly
that.
ascending.
Yes.
Constantly ascending. I don't think that much of myself. What I think of is how much better could I be? Where do I want to be? What type of father figure and role model do I want to be for not only my kids, but the other kids in this community, right? Constantly
Exactly.
improving and overcoming the concept of overcoming yourself. And I think that is not as popular as it should be, even within our own cause. There are people that consider themselves living the 14 words that treat their bodies like garbage.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They're out of shape. They eat goy slop poison. They take poison from the medical system. They inject poison into their kids. They take in media that is poison in their mind. Like you said, it's mental, physical, and spiritual. And so
Yes.
I just wanted to interject, and I apologize for cutting you off. I want to say to anyone
no.
out there that feels like Southern Nordic that says, man, I'm just not in a good spot. And Western, over there in Ozarkia is. It's like, man, it doesn't take a whole lot of time to get yourself going with some chickens, and a couple hogs. And it doesn't take much land to do those two things either.
Yes, I know. See, I'm in a unique position. I mentioned earlier about getting into drugs and criminality there for several years. I moved away. Thankfully I do have I have the house I was raised in and a decent little patch of land back home. And my father lives up the road, and we do a lot of gardening and stuff up there. Our neighbors they raise some cattle, so it's really rural. And I swear, like, even though I managed to get myself straightened out for cleaning my life up, turning around, doing something more positive and less self-destructive, I still feel like part of my punishment though is that I'm down here living in a neighborhood, and one day we do plan on returning back to Northeast Tennessee. I mean, that's where our families are. This is temporary, I guess you could say. And even though we've got an acre of land here. Thankfully, it's mostly in the woods. But I am able to do things like I've built several raised beds in our backyard. I do plan on getting some chickens hopefully here by the summer, I'm going to build myself a chicken coop. At least have myself some eggs. One cool thing is actually there's a family at the end of our street that we are close to. They raise chickens, so we are actually able to get fresh eggs virtually anytime we want it. So I mean, and that's what's great about your project of Ozarkia is where you're setting up an intentional community. You can rely on each other for different things that perhaps
Yes.
you and your family alone could not provide. So that's an outstanding idea. I really admire you for the project here. Um,
Yeah, you're talking about being able to provide it, and for your community. It's like we took on getting a Jersey cow, which let me just go ahead and give people feedback after a year of milking a cow twice a day. It is a ton of work, but I believe so much in the nutritional value of raw milk for both myself and my children that we do it. But we
oh
produce
yeah,
about 3.5 gallons a day. So there's a lot of trade opportunity, and there's a lot of
yes,
locals, because even if they're not part of our intentional community, they are living them. They're living our values. They really care about raw milk. And so
yes,
it's one way to ingratiate us within the local community of other families that they stop by and they grab a mason jar full of raw milk, 2 of them a week. And that gets
yeah,
us, just contact points and relationships to ingratiate ourselves with people locally. We're not trying to go out and be hermits in the woods. In fact, what we're trying to do is consolidate
yeah,
power out here, right?
exactly.
It's the point is to move to a strategic location and consolidate white power, not not be rugged individuals, not be a hermit, not be, acting in a way that ostracizes yourself from the local community around you. We don't want that. We want to
Yeah.
ingratiate ourselves, right? And part of that is being productive, having and living your values, having a beautiful family, healthy family, right? And when you
Oh
talk
yeah.
about your family in that way, you bring that type of family around to the local events. People come over and introduce. They go, "Who the heck are you? When did you move
Yeah.
here? Why did you move here?" Right? They just want to know your story, and they want to get to know you because they're like, "Well, you guys are a great addition to this county. So happy that people like you are moving out here." Right?
Oh yeah.
So part of being productive is not just being self-sufficient, but then you start to make barter and trade with eggs and milk and
Exactly.
pork and all this other stuff. And you find a lot of local community that is even outside of our intentional community that is very like-minded. And when things get bad, if and when they do, that'll be very strategically helpful. And not to mention, you just make more friends that way, And
Yeah.
I'm a pretty friendly guy. I like to host. We like to host cookouts and cook brisket, cook some beef ribs in the smoker,
Oh
that sort
man,
of thing.
that's awesome, man. I wish I lived nearby you because I was actually going to ask. That was one of my questions I was going to ask a little while was what your thoughts were on raw milk. I know as soon as I get done with this stream, I'm going to take a trip. It's a little over an hour north of here to one of my friends' dairy to get me a gallon of raw milk that he has stashed back for me. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. You brought that up. Um,
My nutritional outlook is about the overwhelming majority of my consumption is raw dairy and the products that are created from it, and meats that are
oh yeah,
produced either myself or from the other farms around here, from people that are raising it in a natural way with no vet coming out injecting your animals, no antibiotics, no
yes.
steroids, none of that.
No
So
bullshit. None of this synthetic
even
bullshit.
even the feed that I get them, I order the feed from out of state because I get non-GMO, organic, soy-free food that I can't even find it in the Ozarks. Doesn't even
Yeah.
exist. So you can order it in large quantities and have it shipped out to your house. But we go through all those steps, and because we go through all those steps to make sure we're producing the highest quality for ourselves, much less our community, um, we have decided to butcher them ourselves. So within our
Oh, yeah.
community, we have people that are experienced, both in our intentional community and my neighbors. Like my neighbors are like, "Hey man, when you're about to butcher that hog, just let me know, and we'll come out and we'll make sure you don't mess it up the first time, that sort of thing." And
Oh, yeah.
hey, when you want to butcher that cow, so I've both taken a class on butchering, and then I've gone out and helped some of the local farmers do their butchering. Like, "Hey man, if you want to do all the legwork for me, I'm happy to let you and just point you in the right direction." So good skill
See, that's
sets to go
awesome.
ahead and add now, and it again ingratiates yourself to more people in the local community that you wouldn't know otherwise.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. There's people asking in the chat, and I figured I would ask you. Let's see. Uh, they're asking. Someone asked, "Is there two Ozarkias?" I don't know if you want to talk about this or even dwell on it. Let's see. So it's two Ozarkias
Yeah,
there.
the
He's
term
the
the
Ropers.
term Ozarkia is a region. There's a region called Ozarkia, and it is
Yes.
the northern part of Arkansas, and it is the southern part of Missouri. So it kind of overlaps two different states. I've seen that there are people that say a tiny bit of it is in Kansas and Oklahoma, but the majority of the Ozarks or Ozarkia is that region, northern Arkansas and southern
Yeah.
Missouri. Now, there's
Oh,
a there's a guy who leads a different organization that we are not affiliated with that suggests that he came up with the term Ozarkia for the region, like to say this region is called Ozark. I don't know if that's true. I'm not claiming to have created the term Ozarkia. What I claim is the founding of this project, the Telegram channel, all the messaging that's been on it, and the intentional community that has grown. There's two parts to my channel, two things I'm trying to accomplish. And the first that I started it with is promoting the general idea of all of our people that feel the way that we feel to move to the Ozarks, because I believe it is a good spot to do this recipe, starting an intentional community, raising your kids, homeschooling, homesteading, all that. I think it's just a good spot in general. So think of it like the Pac Northwest imperative. It's not like you have to join a specific community or a specific organization. Just in general, this is a good spot for people to move. That's the first part of what I promote with my channel. The second one is, and this started much later after I started the channel, I put up an admin contact for people to reach out to us, my specific intentional community, for them to see if they meet our minimum requirements, to get vetted, and to come check out our intentional community to potentially join us. So those are the two things I'm pushing with the channel. And just to make sure I'm clear on the answer to the question, there is a different organization that goes by a different name. And that person that leads that founded it, is claiming that he coined the term Ozarkia, the term for the region. I don't claim that. I can't verify that. I don't know if that's true. When I started looking up the Ozarks, I saw the term Ozarkia used by a lot of different things. Some of it was musical. Some of it was like country cooking recipes. Some of it was like a libertarian blog out of Missouri. I just saw
yeah.
Ozarkia used kind of like Cascadia is used up in
Yeah.
the Pac Northwest. It's a term I saw, and I thought, well, why not promote the brand? Because I don't know about you, but prior to a year and a half ago when I started the channel, I had never heard of anyone promoting this region as the region. And I'm not saying no one promoted the region in general before. I hadn't heard it. There's a lot of circles within our cause. And I didn't know anyone that was talking about Ozarkia. So I thought, well, what's the best way to promote it? Well, you make a channel called Ozarkia,
Yeah.
right? You name your project Ozarkia. And then what I'm interested in is not just people joining me in our intentional community, because we have high standards. We turn away most people that are interested. We are only focused on families, people with a husband, wife, and children. And that's not a lot of people in our cause. It's not everyone. Unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah.
But because of that, I promote the idea of other people and other organizations founding their own intentional communities here. So for me, other organizations thriving and growing and bringing and attracting racially conscious white people to this region, that's a win. That's a win for me. That's a win for this channel. That's a win for our race. I'm supportive of that. And my hope is the channel that I've created creates more of a buzz around this as a destination for people to do that. And so I'm not claiming to have coined any term. I am claiming the Ozarkia Project, which is a channel on Telegram, and it is an intentional community offline. That's what I'm a founder of, and I hope that clarifies the question.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a fine answer right there. I just seen people were talking about that in the chat. Let's see. I've got a question here for you, and it was a question I was going to ask later, actually. Rabbi Moshe Goldstein, it sounds like you're just being antagonistic. Anyways, if you're just here to talk shit, you can go fuck off somewhere. Anyways, Slowburn, my good friend Slowburn asks the question: what is the climate humidity in Ozarkia? What is the climate, Western?
There's different zones. Let me look up the exact zone. My wife knows this because she handles the gardening. So, climate zone of northern Arkansas. But just to give you the answer, what you're looking for there is, how well do things grow here? And the South grows livestock and gardens extremely well, and you get a very long growing season from like say late March, early April, all the way through to the end of October, early November for your growing season. So on the
Yeah.
plant hardiness zone, look here, it looks like we are in 7A and 7B, sort of around this region in north central Arkansas.
Yeah.
But the general idea there is like very long growing seasons, especially as compared to some of the other regions that people are relocating to. It is very productive land and very relatively affordable land, which is also important in any sort of relocation effort. Land out here, decent land out here, goes for about $2,000 an acre.
Damn, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the coldest, let's see. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, do y'all get much snow over that way?
The average snowfall is 5. Sorry, what's that?
Ahead. I was going to say, we actually, in Northeast Tennessee, we get quite a bit of snow up there. Down here in Southeast Tennessee, it's not as much, not anywhere near as much. But anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to
we get
interrupt you.
An average of 5 inches of snowfall per year. And that's usually broken up over maybe 2 or 3 snows. So you get a dusting three times a year.
That sounds
there's
similar
not snow, but no build up, and it's usually gone within a couple of days because the general temperature, like right now in the wintertime, if it's not a cold snap, we'll usually get in the high 40s to mid 50s and sunny through most of the wintertime. And then you'll have a cold spell coming in where it might snap down below freezing, but generally pops right back up into the high 40s, low 50s and sunny during the wintertime. Now, the other part of the question was humidity. You get humidity in the middle of summer, just those dog days of summer in the South, like into June, July, August. That's when you get the humidity. It is hot and humid, but part of that is it's so wet when it's hot. That's why things grow so much around here. It's why it's lush when you visit in spring, summer, fall. It looks so lush around here because you got a lot of water and you got a lot of heat. And if you got both of those things, you can grow a lot. And that's part of the incentive for me, or the interest, to choose this as a destination for relocation.
Damn right. Very nice. Let's see here. What was I going to ask you next?
As you think about that, there's a couple other points that I think make this a good one. The laws here are pretty slanted in our favor as much as any state is going to be. So I'll give you a couple examples. We have constitutional carry gun laws, meaning if you're over 18, you do not need any specific license to open or concealed carry or to purchase a firearm. We also have stand your ground as a default law, and we also have castle doctrine. So you are able to both arm yourself, conceal or open carry without a license, and legally defend your family, your property, even outside of your property, yourself and your family without retribution. And so again, we don't believe there's any of these states represent us, but that's better than a lot of other states. We don't have restrictions on guns like you're starting to see in the Pac Northwest and some of the other states. Homeschooling. And I know, I'm hoping you become a father here soon, but this is going to be important, is there's a drastic difference between homeschooling laws between state to state. So let me give you what Arkansas, just a brief synopsis of what Arkansas is. And it's similar in Missouri versus like say Pennsylvania. My wife just gave me that as a contrast. So in Arkansas, homeschooling doesn't require any standardized testing, meaning there's not a specific test with specific questions you have to have your kids test out on. Meaning you don't have to teach them all the CRT garbage that's being pushed, the anti-white stuff that's being pushed into the school systems. There's no requirement for vaccination records or any medical records to do homeschooling. The educator, meaning my wife, doesn't require any teaching qualifications. She doesn't have to go get certified by the state. She doesn't have to have a college degree. She doesn't, like, there's no requirements of the person that's doing the education. There's no state mandated subjects, so they can't mandate Holocaust education. They can't mandate any of the anti-white stuff that they're pushing in your homeschooling curriculum. There's no mandated set number of hours or days per year. Okay. And all of this may seem like, well, yeah, that probably is what a lot of homeschooling laws in, and it's not. Here's the dramatic difference. So let me contrast that with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, the educator, this one isn't bad. It requires you have a high school diploma and a criminal background check, which I don't necessarily think those are bad things, except you mean you can't homeschool your own kids if you have a criminal history? That seems odd.
Yeah.
But the rest of these are pretty bad. You must be fully vaccinated based on the state immunization schedule in order to be accepted as a homeschool.
Wow.
So then any shots, including COVID, that are now on there are required for you to homeschool.
Oh, fuck
you
that.
must teach 180 days or 900 hours per year with state mandated subjects, including their version of history. You must hand in student work samples. So you gotta show the work that they're doing and hand it to the state for review to make sure they agree with what you're teaching. You must complete standardized testing in grades 3, 5, and 8. And then the kids each year by June 30th must be evaluated by a state qualified evaluator. So I say this because there are many people that are interested in homeschooling that when they have kids or when their kids are of age, they're going to homeschool, and they haven't really looked into what the differences are region to region, state to state, right? Arkansas is very friendly to what we're doing with homeschooling. And so that's a big part. I think too many of our people and families, especially the wives and kids, are isolated because of our worldview. And they don't have the friend circles that they should. They don't have the wife community that they should.
Yeah.
And that's what we're creating here. And part of that, a very big part of that, is being able to homeschool together and having freedom to teach our children our true history, our true identity, and really build them up to be the strongest children they can be. So
Absolutely.
To me, that's huge. That's the gun laws, homeschooling, COVID. This is one of the least vaccinated regions of the United States. Arkansas as a state is pretty low in terms of vaccination rates, but the Ozark region specifically, last I looked at for the counties around here, it's roughly 30% vaccinations, which you compare that with other places, it's dramatically low. And the majority of that is going to be in the elderly population around here, which is not going to make that much of a difference here in a couple of years for some of them. And then one law I just sent you recently, and I'll get off my soapbox after I talk about this law, but I sent to you recently because the state legislation in Arkansas just changed the classification of a drag show, a drag queen story hour, anything to do with drag queens, basically homosexuals dressing up as the opposite gender and doing shows for children that we keep seeing done all across Western countries. They've now reclassified that to require that, one, it's banned from all public venues. So any public property it's banned from. So no libraries, no parks, none of that stuff. And it's reclassified to now it can only legally take place inside of a venue commercially zoned as adult entertainment.
Yeah.
And so because it would be zoned as adult entertainment, you wouldn't have children that would be allowed to be exposed. And in fact, part of the law says if there's within view of a minor, it cannot take place in that location. So look, again, I don't believe in a political solution. I know this system doesn't represent us, but if you're picking a spot to go set up, having new laws like that passed, that's a benefit.
It's kind of that's promising. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you had sent me that article. It was last week you had sent it to me, and I remember reading it. Let's see. I was going to ask you, do y'all, this is just something curious, and as I'm not all that familiar with the geography of the area, I read that there were basically two primary mountain ranges in Ozarkia. One is, I think, the Boston Mountain Range. The other is the St. Francois. You'll have to excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that. I'm not very good at pronouncing French words, obviously.
Me either, man. Me either.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the New Madrid fault line? It is a fault line that there was a massive earthquake. It was sometime back in the 1800s. My question is, do y'all ever have any rumblings of any earthquakes? I would imagine you probably don't, but the fault line, it's like a strike slip fault line. There was a massive earthquake that happened. It
Mm.
was sometime back in the 1800s. Do y'all ever have any like tremors there? I know this is kind of off the wall question. It was just something I thought of last night.
Yeah, no worries. I just looked it up. The New Madrid fault line. It looks like it's almost exactly along the Mississippi River, so on the border of
Yes,
Arkansas and
yes.
Tennessee and Mississippi, there up in Illinois. The red zone looks to be about in the black part of Mississippi, or I'm sorry, of Memphis, and that whole
Yeah.
surrounding area. And then it looks like it goes to like yellow and further out dissipates. So where I'm at, if I'm in that area, it looks like the edges of the yellow from what I'm seeing. So it doesn't look like I would be necessarily affected by it, but I do see it's there on the edge, sort of. But that's not really the Ozarks. That's sort of the flatlands, if you think
Yeah.
the delta of the Mississippi, where the old plantations were, and we would not advise living there because it is very, very black. There's a lot of blacks
Oh,
that
yeah.
were once slavery ended, they didn't go anywhere. They just stayed right there.
Stayed
They've
there.
always been there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
I've
we get a lot of influx of whites from that area that are just like, I've had it. I've had it.
can't
I
take
don't want
it.
to see
Can't
another black
take it
person as
anymore.
long as I live. And they move out. And when you meet them, you go, "Why'd you move here?" They are explicit. I mean, they're very nice, very middle class, nice looking white families that just are very explicit. I don't want to see another black person as long as I live. If they even use those terms, they might use different terms.
Yeah, they dance around it perhaps a little bit. Yeah, that was just
But in
something I
terms
was
of the
curious.
mountain range, it's so the Ozarks are in reality they're plateaus. So
Yeah.
there's the
Yes.
Boston Mountains, the Springfield Plateau, the Salem Plateau, and then the Saint, as you said, Francois Mountains, I think is how you would say it. But it's essentially a lot of plateaus made of limestone and sandstone that, with water, they erode over time, and you get these deep, deep ravines and hollers that come as a result of that erosion. And you also get massive cave systems, right? So when
Oh,
you're
okay.
talking about
Yeah.
topology, you're talking about interesting stuff and things that might be beneficial to us down the road. Having massive cave systems inside of these, what people refer to as mountains, but they're actually plateaus, pretty beneficial from a strategic perspective.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I heard you say limestone, and it automatically clicked with me that I was like, there might be some caves there. Definitely.
Lots of caves, yeah. Back in the moonshine days, lots of
Oh, yeah.
stills put up in those caves. This is a very rebellious bloodline out here.
Oh, that's what I
The
love.
ethnicity of these peoples
That's
are
what I love.
very rebellious. They're very clannish. They're very skeptical of outsiders. They'll put you through the grilling to find out who and what you are, what you're about, before you get accepted into these types of communities out here, because they're very protective of their culture and their way of life. Folk music is very big out here. Kids playing fiddles, banjos, and forming bluegrass music bands. It's all that's huge out here. They have an intact culture. It's not a suburban, strip mall culture yet, right? It ain't going to stay that way. I think we're always going to have to work and push against that. But this region doesn't lend itself to commercial development.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying they've got an intact culture and they're very clannish. In fact, that's why the
That is a very important
KKK is
thing.
headquartered in Harrison, Arkansas, right?
Yeah.
It's a clannish spot, and that was why that name makes sense. I don't have any affiliation with them, but I know that Harrison, Arkansas is a spot where the KKK had their headquarters.
Yeah, there was that video that you told me about Harrison, Arkansas being the most racist place in the United States after that guy went out there holding that Black Lives Matter sign. Oh man, it was interesting. My friend
Well,
Billy Bob
it's a
had a.
funny video.
Oh,
Sorry,
go
I
ahead.
just I want to elaborate on that. So it's a funny video because a couple years ago, someone held up a Black Lives Matter sign in Harrison, Arkansas, which the title of the video is like "Most Racist Town in America or in the World" or something like that. It went
Yeah.
viral because so many of the townspeople in Harrison, Arkansas, gave them a big piece of their mind, and some of it was thinly veiled threats, some of it was explicit threats, but people were pushing back on the message of Black Lives Matter, and you love to see it. But the downside of it is, that got that small town so much attention that NGOs started flooding the area with money to back
Yep.
candidates for mayor, city council, and their school board. And so this small town in rural Ozarks of northern Arkansas is now having the full weight of Zog pushing the anti-white agenda in all levels of civic government there, the school system, and they're poisoning the minds of the kids out there because they raised up a big flag and they said, this is where we're doing it. This is where we're racist. And it's like, all right, that's a challenge to the ADL and the Jews behind them that push this anti-white stuff. And so they are putting millions of dollars to destroy the minds of children in that small white town. And so I personally, for our project, I don't want to make that same mistake. I don't want that money flowing into this area to do the same thing. And that's part of the reason we keep a little bit lower profile. I don't put my name and face out there. I'm not looking to get this area that we're in or the families associated with us any more heat than they already have, just believing the wrong things that we do.
Absolutely. I want to going back to the clannish structure. You know how you just mentioned that the area doesn't lend itself to commercialism, and that is something that I love about my part of Appalachia, up there in Northeast Tennessee, in an extreme rural part. You know, commercialism, I think, while it provides jobs and stuff, I think it's a curse sometimes. You know, this may sound counterintuitive, but I have thought before that sometimes poverty can be a blessing in a way. Not crippling poverty, of course, but, you know, I wanted to ask you, do you know what like the native Ozarkians, what would you say their ancestry largely is? Is it largely Scots Irish, like it is here in Appalachia, or English and German? Do you know much about that?
Yeah, it's similar to Appalachia. It's Scotch
I figured it
Irish
was.
and German is the two predominant ethnicities out here.
I wanted to ask you too. Do you have any like Amish or Mennonite communities in Ozarkia? I was just curious about
Yeah,
that as well.
yeah. I actually have some interaction with the Amish up around Salem in northern Arkansas, and they do a lot of organic feeds out of there at a very low cost, and it's supporting what I think is a great cause for them and themselves, right? Just strong white ethnic communities that's based around a strong religion, and so I support them out there. There's some Mennonites that are closer to us, but they're not set up in the same way of like the community like the Amish are out here. I know
Yeah.
less about them, but yeah, the Amish I have interactions with, and I really enjoy conversations with the guy that runs that place out there because I've talked to him pretty openly about what we're doing here. Now, I don't call it National Socialism or anything like that, but I just expressed to him the values, the reasons why, what we're trying to accomplish. And he found it fascinating because he's like, look, I'm here trying to hold on to what we've held
Yeah.
on to for this long. And I'm trying to combat the arguments of people within our Amish community saying, well, what does it hurt if we just bring
Open
this
up a little
technology,
bit. Yeah.
open up a little bit? Yeah. And it would help us and we'd be stronger. And yeah, so he's trying to make the argument of like slippery slope. Obviously, if you do this, it's going
Exactly.
to lead to that. Right. And with each generation, you're going to get more modern. He sees that, but he's like, it's such a hard sell, yet you are trying to return to what just as like for me, myself, my great grandfather lived off the land. He was a homesteader. And
Yeah.
on his tax forms that I found on Ancestry, it says like occupation, it just says work in my land. So
Yeah.
I'm 2 generations removed of a bloodline that's been working the land for millennia, right? And
Oh yeah.
so I'm trying to return to that, but I'm trying to impress to him to help him build the argument. I go, there's so much generational knowledge that we've lost. Now, thankfully, the great community around us, all the farmers and ranchers around us, they love to give you advice. I mean, if you call over to my guy across the street's got 400 acres and a huge herd, you call and ask him anything about cattle, boy, is he gonna you better mark off an hour of your time at least, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also asking the Amish for their feedback, on planting and how to do gardening and how to raise livestock naturally, because they really care about doing it naturally and without vets as well. So yes, they're out here, and I've made some good strides to build relationships with the Amish.
Well, that's awesome to hear. Give me just a second to shut this door. My dog's barking. He heard a door shut across the street. Give me just 1 second. I'll be right back.
No worry.
All right, sorry about that. My my small dog, he likes to raise hell sometimes. My hound dog back there in the backyard, he's a lot more quiet. Um, there
Yeah.
was a question from my friend Billy Bob. Let me post it here. He asked, "What was the most difficult part of setting up the intentional community, in your opinion?"
Personalities.
Personalities.
Yeah. It's one thing to run like an activism organization that is looking for young white males to come together and go do activism together because you got common cause and it's brotherhood and all that. It's an entirely different thing to try to create a community from scratch with families who have never met each other under the idea of the 14 words, the 88 precepts, right? It's different because you've got wives involved, you've got kids involved, you've got all that comes with different families who may believe the same thing, but there's different circles within circles, I guess is the way to say it. So it's managing the idea that like, hey, there's something that we're doing that's greater than our individual egos, right? And so I think that's been difficult. Um, some of the other stuff is just getting the physical demands of setting up infrastructure on a homestead, right? You
Yeah.
move out to these areas that predominantly most of this land is owned by older people, retirees, and so when you buy their properties, the fence lines haven't been mended in 10 plus years. Some of the pastures have been grown over and you got saplings growing up. If there even is infrastructure in terms of pens or paddocks, a lot of it's been knocked down by trees and inclement weather and stuff, and it's never been repaired. So the first year on a homestead is it's a lot of work, and make no mistake, you can find ways to make it cost less, but there's a real investment in capital to try to
Yeah.
set up hog pens. Like the cost of building supplies and materials have gone up dramatically in the last few years. So just building fences, just building a little hog shelter, just building a little calf pen or something like that, a chicken coop, chicken run, right? That stuff's it costs more than I think some people think,
Oh yeah, it
right? So
does.
you got to plan for that. And so those have been some of the things. Also, just I think anyone who's been around in this movement long enough knows you're just not going to get along with everyone in other organizations. That's been a bummer. There's been a lot of organizations that we have gotten along with. Like I met with the League of the South. There's a
Yeah.
guy in Arkansas for League of the South, and had great experiences with him. I've met up with some of the leaders of the Asatru Folk Assembly out here. There's some good
Yes.
folks over there. There's I've had contact online with some of the Mid Missouri Proud Boys, who I believe are of similar mind to us. And there's just generally people who reach out to me that are already in the Ozarks saying like, man, I'm glad you're raising the profile of this for people like us. Because even the guys in Missouri that I don't necessarily live near, because I mean, heck, you could drive 6-7 hours north and still be in the
In
Ozarks,
Ozarkia. See,
right?
that's how it is here in
Yeah, you could
Appalachia
still
as
be
well. Absolutely. It's a large
right, but
area.
they're happy because they're like, hey man, if you find anyone that's out in Missouri, closer to me, or they're interested in moving out there, just connect me to them. So the channel's been it's been nice because it's allowed me to not just build the intentional community of my own, but to connect other people that are a little bit further of a drive away from us.
Oh yeah. Man, it sounds great. That was a good answer. I've got another random question from the chat here. Rick Smith asks us, and I wanted to ask you this as well. You fellers ever do any ramp hunting? I think it's kind of a secret here in central Indiana. Well, that's something I've learned right there, Rick Smith. I thought ramps was only a thing in Appalachia. Do you have ramps in Ozarkia by chance? Or have you ever heard the term?
Bulb and secret. So it looks like a way to forage out, and I'm reading what it is, and it sounds like how I feed my hogs through the winter time, in that I plant a bunch of turnips and things that sprout through the winter time, and I have them eat the blossom that comes out of it over
Oh
and
yeah.
over again without eating up the roots. But I may be off there because I had not heard that term before someone mentioned
Okay.
it.
I was going to say a ramp is like it's kind of like a wild onion. They're really strong and they kind of look like a leek, I guess you could say. Um,
Mhm.
it's I didn't know that was a thing up in central Indiana. If they have it up there, I'd imagine y'all have ramps in Ozarkia. Uh,
We have wild onions called Allium cernum. It's called nodding wild onion, and they're all over my property.
let me see
But I
here.
don't think it's the ones like the leeks, like you're saying.
Let me see here. A ramp.
The ones that I'm talking about have a very thin green part sticking up out of the ground
What
and a
did you
very
say that name was
small
again?
white. One
What did you say
second.
the Latin name of it
Allium
was again?
cernum. Allium,
Okay.
Allium, cernum,
Yeah.
Cernum.
Okay. This is okay. That's well. Obviously, what you have over there, it's similar because a ramp is Allium trichosum or trichocum, however you say it.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just a Appalachian thing. It was just something I was curious about. Um, anyways, let's
Now there's
see. Oh, go
definitely a
ahead.
lot of foraging out here. We bought a book about Ozark foraging, and that's part of our homeschooling curriculum with our kids, is to teach them what they can forage around here in terms of like mushrooms and edible plants and stuff like that. Because there's quite a bit of it out in the Ozarks, and I think it's helped some of these people survive during some harsh times.
Very nice. Very nice. Let me see. There was another question too I wanted to ask you right quick from the chat. Let me scroll up. Okay, Aaron asks, Southern Nordic and Western Masculine, we know Ozarkia is a highly Christian area. What are the thoughts of white traditional ancestral Odinic heathens?
What are
What's your
my
thoughts
thoughts
on it?
specifically? Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
sure.
Ozarkia is race first. So for us, we have Christians that are race first, and we also have people that be called an Odinist or a heathen or a asatru, depending on the individual person. But yeah, we're welcoming both of those as long as people understand that the race is at the core of any religion.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, to put it simply,
That's,
I go ahead.
hold on. I was just going to say, when I think I told you this offline last night, but whenever I started this channel, I was fairly anti Christian, you could say. But over time,
Hmm.
I have, softened my position on that because I mean I understand, Christianity. It's a part of our people. Yeah, I may have my problems with it, but regardless, it's inherent, especially here in America. Is church as big of a deal in Ozarkia as it is here in Appalachia?
Yeah,
I'm
there
just
is
curious.
a really, really high per capita number of churches. Almost, if I even said the number, you might laugh just because of how small of a population we have. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of churches, and a lot of them are similarly of the same denomination. Like there's probably 12 Baptist churches in this county,
Oh
if
yeah,
not more. There
yeah.
might even be more. I
That's
might be underselling that. Um, it's very Protestant. I think there's one Catholic church within an hour drive of me, and that's typically for people vacationing here. There's not, I don't meet a lot of Catholics out here. But the churches, to be honest, it's tough for me because they're very Zionist, and they definitely push we're all the same, we're all equal in the eyes of God. Jews are God's chosen people, and we got to do everything we can to send our money and efforts toward the non-white communities outside of the Ozarks. I've been to several churches here, and that is the message. And as you walk in, you see Israeli flags prominently displayed on the entrance, next to the pulpit. I mean, it is, and it's interesting too because the people that live here don't really understand Jews at all. Like they don't even. They're going to church mostly. It's a cultural thing. It's a cultural center. It's a networking place. It's where you are seen and you see others. It's where you catch up with people once a week. Um, what's being set up in the front. I mean, I'm not saying a lot of them don't consider themselves culturally Christian. I just don't think they pay that much attention to the pro-Israeli, pro-diversity message. But it is being pushed even in these areas where people are racially aware. The locals here, they live here because they don't want to live in Little Rock where it's black. I mean, they're pretty open about that. Some of them don't think that it's polite to say that out loud, but you get them in a
Yeah.
one-off conversation a couple of times, and you mentioned Little Rock. Well, they'll give you some disgusted look and be like, ugh, yeah, Little Rock's disgusting. Yeah, they might not say it explicitly, right? But anyways, and so it's weird that the pastors in these towns still push this message, but it's not organic. That message is not coming from the local people, but it is coming from the churches around here, unfortunately.
Well, church is a huge thing here in Appalachia, and the way you described it is very similar to how it is. I mean, even in my hometown, there are so many, or village, it ain't even a town, there are so many churches. I wouldn't doubt there's between 20 and 30, and this town just has a population of, I mean, it's not even a town, it's an unincorporated area, but it may have about 1,000 people or so. I mean, my high school that I grew up, the high school that I went to, there was 42 kids in my senior class, to give you an idea of how small this area is. Well, there's so many different churches around, and I'm with you on the race first thing. That's my thoughts exactly. One thing I have thought before is I had this idea maybe last year. It may have been almost 2 years ago by now. It's amazing how time has flown. But I had an idea that if we wanted to get our message out in Appalachia, one of the best ways to do it would be to try to get the message out through some of these small mountain churches. You couldn't do this in any big church or any diverse church that's in any of the larger but still small towns in Appalachia. You couldn't do that, I would imagine. But if there was a way to try to, somehow get the message out in some of these small mountain churches, and I would imagine it would be the same in Ozarkia. If you could do that, it would help things. But it's just a matter of being able to get your foot into the door. Because, the churches, that's something I've thought about here in Appalachia. Unfortunately, due to modernity, one of the things, there's very few things that draws the community together nowadays. One of those things would be high school football games or basketball games. The other is church. Now, you couldn't ever do anything with a racial sort of message in any sort of public school. I imagine they would shut that down so quick your head would spin. But if you could get a hold of some of these smaller churches and spread the message that way, might be possible. But any of these larger churches, and even I would imagine too, a lot of the smaller churches, sadly, they receive a lot of money from, whatever the denomination might be, But anyway, I didn't mean to go too far off that tangent. Let's see. Has anybody got any questions here? There's another question. Western, any problems with snakes and predators in your area? Got any poisonous snakes over there?
Yes.
I'd imagine yes.
Yeah, there are poisonous snakes. I just anecdotally, I've been out here for about a year and a half. I've seen 2 of them. And I live rural, and I've got a big property, and I'm in the woods and out by ponds and stuff quite a bit. I've only seen 2 of them that were poisonous. Don't see a whole lot of snakes, but I think that's due in part to the Pyrenees, the Great Pyrenees that I have at my house that protect my livestock.
Yeah.
They kill snakes, and so do the hogs. So I think that may be part of it. So I do know the Ozarks is full of there's cottonmouth, water moccasin, and
so those cottonmouths
timber
there.
rattler. Yeah, they exist out here. I don't see them, and I've just the people I know around. I've asked them, like, I don't really see much. Like, every couple of years you might see one, but I will say I'll even throw out there what you do get here is ticks. You get ticks.
Okay.
You could convince me that some Jewish NGOs dumped a lot of ticks out here specifically to harm these white populations, because there are a lot of ticks. Now, not a lot of mosquitoes, which is interesting because there's a large bat population because of all the caves. So the mosquito population, at least in my area, seems to be really well taken care of. It's just you got to check for ticks in the warm season when you come in from outside.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But predators, there's I think so. There's coyotes. There's wild boar, which can be really destructive to a property.
Yes.
Well, razorbacks, right? They think of Arkansas razorbacks. That's the reason.
That's what the state's university. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why there's a lot of wild hogs out here, and I believe there's some mountain lions out here as well. I even had a calf that I lost to one of them a couple months back, and it could have been coyotes because the cattle that I've got, even the females have horns, and they will gore coyotes. They will absolutely gore coyotes and leave them there to bleed out. So it could have been a pack of coyotes, and I've got cross fencing. So only I think of is mountain lions, and I've heard of other people catching them on trail cams. There's bobcats, and there's black bear. Now they're not big; they're pretty small bears, but there are black bears around here. I've caught a couple of them on my trail cams before.
Very nice. I was about to ask about coyotes. Just a quick question. Do you have any donkeys on your property? Because over here in Appalachia. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just laughing because it's been a thing between me and my wife. When we first got here, she really wanted a donkey because she heard they killed snakes. And coyotes.
Exactly. I was asking.
We bought this property, and across the holler, I guess you could say, the ravine, across the road there, a guy's got a donkey. And man, he's not anywhere close to me. I can't even see his house. But every morning when I go out with the kids to feed our animals, I hear that donkey going off. I mean, like a car alarm. It is so loud.
Yes, that's our neighbor in their field back home. They used to have a couple of donkeys to protect their cattle, and gosh, if once it goes off, man, it's like you could hear it all the way a mile down at the bottom of the holler. You could hear it.
Well, things echo around here because of the topology, and depending on where you're at in the holler, you could have I can hear one of those old Chevy Z71s coming from about 2-3 miles away because of how the glass packs echo the exhaust through these haulers. So it's really quiet out here, but you can hear a low hum of an engine coming from a really long way off. And that even comes into one of the things I was surprised by when I first came out here is just the stars without all the light pollution.
Oh, it's the true country dark right there. I love the true country dark.
It's so cool.
Yes.
You look up and there's just, you can see all the stars and the Milky Way and all that stuff. I don't know a lot about astrology or all the stars and everything. It's beautiful, man.
Oh,
It's something everyone mentions the first time they come out to visit us is looking up at the stars at night and the sunsets. We get some really pretty sunsets out here. I sent you one yesterday.
You sent me that picture. Absolutely. I know my dad, he's an amateur astronomer. He's got a telescope. I think the lens on it is 12 inches wide. So, I mean, this thing is huge. He sets it up in his backyard. That's one of the things I miss now. Where I live now, you can still see a lot of the constellations, but it isn't nothing like it is back home in the true country dark. I'm glad you brought that up. Let's see here. Is there any other questions from the chat real quick? I thought I seen one. I imagine y'all had timber going back to the predator thing. Y'all have timber rattlers. You said you had cottonmouths. Do y'all have copperheads as well?
Yeah. They got all those. I don't see them as much. I spent some time in other areas like West Texas where there's rattlesnakes everywhere. Yeah. And say Oklahoma, North Texas, there's water moccasins. You get out on any body of water, you're going to see some water moccasins coming your way. And I don't know. I haven't seen it here. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I can only speak to my own anecdotal experience. I don't see them that often. I see some garter snakes, which is like whatever.
Yeah.
I know.
But, I know here in Appalachia, we just have copperheads and timber rattlesnakes. We don't have any water moccasins or cottonmouths up here. Another question for you. Oh, go ahead. I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
One of the things I wanted to put out there too, I've said it in previous streams, but one of the things I hadn't considered before moving out here was just, I don't want to, relaxing might be the way, but there's like people that come out here to unplug. right? That you're caught up in the city
Yeah.
and your daily, your weekly grind and all the stuff you got to do to support your family. People like to come vacation out here because it's very relaxing. The demographics are such that not really worried about getting mugged or, violence occurring or that sort of thing. And you typically run across people with friendly smiles and friendly dispositions, to the effect that I just noticed like my shoulders are not so tense all the time. And it
Yeah.
takes a little while because you're still going to have that, like, hyper vigilance, which I recommend keeping sharp wherever you're at. But you just don't feel this impending sense of, like, at any moment, right, around these
Yeah.
non-whites, you can't relax. And I honest, I 100% legitimate. This is an honest statement. I go months without seeing non-whites, months.
Yeah.
And I go to restaurants where there's not any other person besides a white person in that restaurant. And I can't even people who are within our cause that they believe what I believe, I don't think they can truly appreciate the effect that has on your well-being on a day in,
Yeah.
day out, month in, month out, a year and a half of living out here. Man, it feels very different when I'm looking at all the terrible stuff going on Telegram that you see that's going on in the world and happening to our people. Because I remember being a guy similar to your situation, Southern, is you see all this stuff happen. You're like, man, I want to prepare, but there's only so much I can do where I'm at.
Yeah.
And there's that anxiety builds up, that tension builds up. And then once you're here, you're like, well, that's another crappy thing that happened. Let me go work on my land and work towards a solution. And because you're taking action each day, each week with our
It's
community,
rewarding. It's rewarding
it doesn't
and it's
weigh on you the same
productive.
way. It's rewarding. Yeah,
Yes.
productive. It doesn't
Dude,
weigh
that's
on
what
you the same way.
dude, whenever I was working on my house or around my place back home or in the gardens or just even in my raised beds out here, building them and planting, I had to build. I found a hound dog back in April of last year. I went fishing up in the mountains east of here, and he had been abandoned. He was young and he was almost starved to death, but I brought him home, and I had a couple of raised beds. I built a couple more, but not long after I got him home, I was like, man, he's going to dig my beds up. So I had to build an entire fence around it. But that sort of thing, it's rewarding. I find that much more rewarding than going to your, 9 to 5 or your career. People worry about their careers all the time. I'm just like, man, I drive a truck for a living. I don't give a shit about a career. I'd rather work around my house and for myself.
Yeah, agreed. One of the most satisfying experiences I've had in this last year and a half is, like, after a harvest of whether it's chicken or hogs or whatever, having our families around, couple of pregnant women, newborns, bunch of kids running around the house, cooking up the stuff that you produced as a community. Someone bringing
Yeah.
over some lamb, someone bringing over some raw milk, someone bringing over some poultry or eggs, and the cheeses that are made from the raw milk, the cream, the yogurt,
Oh,
all that
yeah.
stuff, and making a meal with your community and other families, other wives, other kids playing around in the background. You catch yourself. I've caught myself, some of the other guys, some of the other dads just catch themselves. This is what it was all for.
Yeah.
This is what
Absolutely.
all of the stress of relocating your family was for. This moment, this interaction, and having those on a regular basis is so much better for your soul, for your mental well-being than you could possibly imagine until you're there.
It's our
Just
people's natural
heading out and
habitat. It's our natural
correct,
habitat.
taking all the other kids out to go show them, the different animal pens and letting them feed those animals and looking up at the beautiful scenery and the mountains around you. And just the smells of freshly baked bread, cookouts, that sort of stuff, man. I love that's my children's normal, that's the children in this community. That's going to be their normal. They're going to grow up around other families living and talking as I do, right? I'm just the
Absolutely.
spokesperson. I want to make that clear. I'm not the leader of a group. I am the spokesperson for a community. There are other men that in many ways are my better. And in other ways, I'm their better, right? It's a natural hierarchy that forms depending on the situation. There's a guy that we got that has like a master's in permaculture. I have so much to learn from him, but I enjoy the process. I don't try to correct him and his advice. I'm like, hey, you just tell me what's the best way to do this.
What's the best process? Yes, exactly.
Right. So we've all got our skill sets, and it's really cool to see how it's building in the foundation we have now with a good number of families that are. It takes longer to get the best men out here because they got more ties, more connections, more of a career to try to move out here. But it has been worth the wait, and I think this year is really going to be something special. Seeing the amount of people that are already here. Just moved in another family last week.
Really nice.
Who got a great job out here. Oh man, the guy, I love it. He got a great job out here, a great house. You know, some of these houses out here, they're not the nicest. Some of them you got to remodel, but he got a beautiful one. And we got a couple others set to come up this year that I'm very excited about. And we'll be in a position where it's not about infinite growth, right? I'm not looking to add 100 families just to have 100 families. If we added 1 to 2 families a year for the next 5 years, that would be. I mean, you just think about the numbers as that starts to add up. Okay, let's say you get to there, and those numbers. How many kids do you have as you're getting together when you have 4 or 5 kids apiece?
Absolutely.
But it's exciting, man. I got to say, as much as there's always going to be setbacks, as much as there's always going to be some downers, some negative stuff that goes along with any sort of positive action you're trying to take. I got to say, overall, it's been a really rewarding experience. And I owe a lot of that to the good people that have responded to the message, come out here and visited us, and then the ones that have ultimately relocated their families out here. Got to give a huge thank you to all of them that I know we're going to listen to the stream at some point.
That's awesome. There was 2 more questions here. Western, God damn it. I scrolled up too far. Boomer Tech. How's the internet situation there is what they were asking. The 5G towers in your area. Do you ever have problems with your connection online? Do you ever have issues?
Internet connection we're solid on. So it's no secret. I work remotely. I rely on the internet to do my work, and I have to do video streaming for work, and I can do that no problem. And I am as rural as you can get. Zoom does not take as much internet bandwidth as you would imagine if you've never looked into it. It actually doesn't take that much to work well. It's in terms of cell coverage, you're spotty in the Ozarks. So I've got great cell phone coverage at my house because my house is at the top of a holler. And it's got pretty flat land, but it's up on a flat top area, so I can get reception pretty well. But as soon as I drive down my long, steep driveway, and I get onto the road, I'm way down in the bottom. And I don't have cell phone coverage for about 20 minutes in one direction and maybe 7-8 minute drive in the other direction. So that's pretty common out here. And it depends on which part of the region you're in to whether or not AT&T versus like Verizon, which one of them works better. Where I'm at, it's very much one or the other as in terms of which one works and which one doesn't. But I don't have 5G towers around me. I'm not saying they're not coming, but I don't live in an area with a 5G tower. I think the closest one is probably a 45-minute drive away.
Okay. Another question.
It's a good question because a lot of people rely on the internet for their livelihood.
Oh yeah,
you can definitely do that. And even towns like bigger places, they're not big, but you know what I mean, relatively, like a Mountain Home and that whole corridor between Mountain Home and Harrison, they've got higher speed internets there. So I mean, you can do anything you can do in a suburb out in those areas. I'm just a little more remote, and I still work everything remotely.
Well, that's good to hear. It sounds like paradise you got there.
Well, I'll be honest. I'll stop you. So I appreciate you saying that. Everything's a trade-off.
Yeah.
I've lived in a lot of places now. I grew up on the plains, and I spent most of my life there, but I've lived in a lot of places since then. Everywhere you move, there's trade-offs. There's downsides to moving out to a place like this. One of them is big box stores, Costco's, Lowe's, Home Depot. They're not close, right? No. And people go, well, good. And I'm like, all right, well, true. I agree with you. But that's still, for a lot of people, that's a hard transition to make, right? To moving out to these smaller areas. There's just less population. There's less stuff to go pay for to do. There's a lot of outdoors, there's natural beauty, there's a lot of farms, a lot of cool stuff to go check out, but it ain't like there's concerts, big entertainment venues going on. And so I think some of the people that have been interested, they've lived in suburbs their whole lives, and I don't know that they're necessarily ready for a rural lifestyle. There are trade-offs, man. And
Yeah.
no matter how good a lot of the population, I'd say even most of the population are out here, there's some bad ones in there too. So
Yeah.
I don't want to make this out to be, this is no utopia. And it doesn't matter where any place, what it is today, the forces working against us in major cities are going to find their way out here. And the NGOs, some of these Zionist, churches are going to push some really negative stuff out here. So it's up to us, right, to make a strong community in a very not populated area to where we can really have power. We can influence who's getting on the local city council, the local county quorum, the local school boards. Even if we don't send our kids to school, it benefits us to make sure there's no one getting on those school boards that are anti-white.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So I don't want to make it seem like a utopia. It's work to be done. There's downsides living out here as well.
Yeah, that's it sounds like you have a wonderful project going though. 14 miles to the right had a question here. Let me ask it real quick. What type of activities does he do with the Ozarkia community to build up and connect everyone together?
Yeah, a lot of it. I find the best for like brotherhood, bonding, that sort of stuff is building infrastructure on each other's properties, building fences. Dude, if you have never dug corner posts in the Ozarks,
I'd say it's rough.
Oh my gosh, man. I could do a 15 minutes on how tough that is, but doing it amongst other men that share your values and you're working towards a goal and you're doing really hard manual labor like that.
Yeah.
Building out infrastructure, shelters and pens and water systems and gardens and all that stuff. I find that to be the best community building. Now, other people might disagree. It might be our cookouts and birthday celebrations. It might be all. I know one family specifically that really loves the bluegrass festivals that we all go to together.
Yeah.
Those sort of things. We go camping. We do a lot of river trips in the summer because, as talked about previously, it is hot and wet in the summertime. So we're like, hey, let's just all meet up at the Buffalo River, Sylamore Creek, the White River.
Yeah.
Let's go get in the water, right? Let's go bring some picnic out there or cook out. And man, there's been a lot of stuff like that I've really loved, and I enjoy those moments. But I think in terms of building bonds, there's really nothing like doing
manual labor together,
physical labor with each other.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good point. Are you much of a fisherman or a hunter? Do you do much of those?
Yeah, the hunting out here is pretty incredible. I grew up doing a lot of fishing, but it's mostly just
I'm more of a fisherman myself.
Yeah,
I heard you mention earlier you had trout over there.
But here there's trout. Yeah, this is for trout fishing east of Wyoming. This is the spot.
Yeah,
this is the spot. So part of the tourism we get in the summertime is based around trout fishing. So there's a lot of locals that I've met that are guides. That's what they do.
Yeah,
part time, right?
They do a lot of fly fishing, I bet, don't they?
Yeah. So trout, I haven't learned it yet, but my son is kind of getting to that age. So we've got plans with some of the other families that they told us they would take us out and teach us. And again, it's just another good bonding activity for us to the local community. And I just love to see my son learn those things alongside me. Hunting is huge out here, man. Our population probably triples during hunting season because so many people. This is a destination for hunting, for turkey, for boar, for deer. Hunting is a major industry out here for Airbnb vacation rentals. They are solidly booked in other regions where you wouldn't be booked at that time of year because it's not, summertime. Where here, all the Airbnbs fill up just full of hunters.
Is it all white-tailed deer over there, or do you have any other species of deer by chance? Okay, that's what I didn't know if y'all were. I didn't know if y'all were. I was just curious. I like to ask people that. We're the same.
Pacific Northwest had mule deer.
Yeah, they have mule deer up there. Let's see. There was another question here from the chat. We're coming along the home stretch here. Let me see. Interesting name, Rabbi Moshe Goldstein. Western. How is the water situation? Average price for a well.
That is a good question. That is a really good question. So, the properties we bought have wells on them. So it's just included in the price of, buying a farm. If you're not
Yeah.
in a town, like if you buy any sort of acreage, you'd have to be really close to that town to not have a well. So they're mostly already dug. That said, it's going to cost for a shallow well, let's call it up to maybe 700 feet. I've heard those go in 10, 15,000, something like that to run a well. Don't quote me on that one. The one you can quote me on is I asked the guy that digs the wells, I said, well, what if I want like unlimited water, never going to have to worry about going dry on even the hottest droughts? He goes, well, you got to get down below 1,500 feet. And I'm like, all right, what does that cost? And he was like, it's about $55,000 to drill down 1,600 feet to get a well down there. But again, most of the places, like the ones that the other families have bought, they already have wells on them.
Very nice. That is expensive, though.
Good question, though.
It's a
Good question.
definite
Lots of
investment.
natural water here. We got natural springs. I've got several ponds on my property. I've got 2 natural springs on it. There's just a lot of water in the Ozarks, and we've had a lot of interest from people in a lot of different places, but the predominantly, overwhelmingly, is Texas. People coming
Yeah.
up to visit us from Texas, but the people from West Texas, when they see how much water and how lush and green it is up here, their eyeballs are like, "Oh my God, I'm sold." I'm like, "Well, there's other cool stuff I want to show you." Like, no, we're good. There's lots of water. There's lots of green. It's very lush. Like, we're good. This is beautiful.
Absolutely. Another question I'll post here. Eternal extrapolations. Good to see you again, man. Question for your guests. Will you explain to your children who and what the enemy is, and at what age will you break their innocence by letting them know the way of the world? Pretty good question.
Boy,
What's your thoughts on it?
So that's personal. I'm not going to project out there what anyone else should do. I'll just give you where I'm at with it. I've got young kids. I've got 4 young kids. I've got a newborn, and my oldest is just shy of 5 years old. So what I've seen is children's natural dispositions is to have an in-group preference. That's built in that most of us had that through media, school, relatives, parents, maybe even told us that you're not supposed to notice those things. So my kids, especially since they live in a very wide area, they do not see non-white people very often. That when they do, it shocks them.
Yeah.
It literally shocks. Like they'll look and point. They'll point and go, "Daddy, look." And they understand the other. So the question is like, what do you say there? My advice is you don't have to spell it all out for them, but it's not bad to say, yeah, that's a different group of people. That's not our people. Our people are the ones that we're safest around. We can trust more. Now, you always got to be a little skeptical, with anyone, even of our race. But those are the people that we can trust. We build a community around. They're going to have our backs when we need them. They are our tribe. And I explain tribe a lot to my kids. But when they, say, for example, about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, just before I made the move, we had a bunch of people within our community over to our house, just kind of a farewell get together. And there was the Tyson Fury fight on. And he was fighting some black that I don't remember the name. It doesn't really matter. But my son, he looked at me and he was like, "Oh, the good guy's beating up the bad guy." Now, I've never, I never put it in those terms. It's just he doesn't have any influence in his life or any shows that he watches that tells him otherwise. He just naturally says, "That looks like a bad guy." I'm like, yeah, the good guy's beating the bad guy. So that's at this age, that's mostly how they view it. Good guys, bad guys.
And bad guys. Exactly. If they were subjected to a lot of this stuff, it's what they try to do. They try to instill white guilt in our youth in a young age.
Mm-hmm.
You have to protect them from it.
And I go a long way to make sure that I'm instilling a really good ethnic identity in them. We read a lot of books about our ancestry. We discuss a lot of stuff related to, the old writings, the Eddas, the Havamal. All of that is very important to me.
Yes.
But just on a lighter note, kids are kids. They just call things as they are, and they'll often say, when it comes to good guys and bad guys, the good guys are beautiful. The good guys are pretty, handsome. And the bad guys are not. The bad guys are ugly. And it cracks you up, and you kind of want to, I don't say that too loud, you know what I mean? But the point is just be like, hey, that black guy is an ugly guy. You're like, yeah, I agree. But that's how they see it, because they're just young, man. They don't have the filter of society placed on them yet. And I don't.
Yeah, they don't have.
I certainly don't.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't say as much that at this age, at their ages, that I would need to feel all the answers there, but I instill a very strong sense of pride in our ancestry and our history. And when they point out group versus in group, I don't scold them for it. I just, yep, you're right, and give them a little smile and nod. And then we teach them, like, hey, we don't yell some of these things out loud in public. Does that make sense? You can talk to me, daddy and mommy about it. That's fine. But you're not going to point and yell and call someone a name or call them ugly. Let's just avoid all that.
Yeah. One of the last questions I wanted to ask you is, I'd asked you this last night, actually, in our conversation. Have you noticed any NGOs in your part of Appalachia? I mean, you're in Ozarkia, I should say. Do they try to push the globo homo propaganda, diversity, all these things? Have you noticed anything like that? Because they're here in Appalachia.
I mentioned Harrison, Arkansas. They've got NGOs out there pushing it.
Yes.
I've heard just from the guys over at the League of the South, they've filled me in terms of what's being done there and how it's happened and why and all the money. The two shot callers, well, I guess there's other shot callers. Two of the major shot callers in Arkansas and in the Ozarks in general is Walmart and Tyson Foods. Walmart is over in Bentonville in the northwest Arkansas corridor. That corridor extends from like Fayetteville up to Bentonville, which is essentially on the border of Missouri. As you can imagine, Walmart, headquartered there, has a massive influence on school boards, on funding, on charities, on NGOs. They're a very negative influence on the area. And then likewise, Tyson Foods, who owns most, if not all, of the food processing, where all the animals get butchered and processed and put out. They are a big part of a lot of illegal immigration to the region. Now, not where I'm at specifically, but on the outskirts of the Ozarks, there's some meat processing plants that are closer to populated areas that are full of Mexicans, and that is due directly from Tyson Foods. So those two are definitely not on our side. The University of Arkansas is obviously bringing as many non-whites into Fayetteville as they possibly can, and they're pushing all the gay and anti-white stuff there.
Yeah.
So you see it, and then I'm again not against race first Christians, but they're just a lot of Zionist churches out here pushing a lot of that stuff too. And as you said, a lot of them get funding from NGOs that are anti-white. So not against Christians themselves, but the churches for sure out here are pushing a message that is anti-white.
Yeah, it's just the sad truth, to be honest. Let's see. One more question I'll take here. This is another good one. I'll post it. Rabbi Moshe again. Western, do you need 4x4 or winter tires during the winter there? How is the mud during the constant rains?
That guy has some good questions. These are the relevant ones. I'm glad everyone stuck around for this, because this is the important stuff. Okay, you better have a 4x4. That is absolutely true, because you got steep grades.
4-wheel drive.
Which direction you're going. 4-wheel drive. I've got really extreme mud tires on mine. I've had them prior to me moving here, and boy, have they served me. They have served me well. I would highly recommend you have a 4x4 with some sort of mud tires. I think the Goodyear KO2s, is that what it is?
Yeah.
I can't remember the specific ones, but yes, get a 4x4. If you're planning on, because when you go out to, when you got a farm, you're using your truck for a lot more than you do in the suburbs. And you're bringing supplies out to the backfield to mend a fence. You're moving your chainsaws. to go clear some down trees. You're cutting up firewood. You're bringing hay or grain out to animals, and like you're going to be out in really muddy spots. And that
Yes.
springtime, what, around March, end of March, beginning of April,
Oh,
it
it's so
is
muddy.
rainy.
Yep.
So much rain, and it just turns into it's muddy out here. It doesn't take much to disturb the topsoil and get just mud. And so I've got a trail that goes around a holler through some woods, and it is muddy. I'm going to have to spend some money to get someone to really put a decent road through there, because it gets bad. Even my tractor, it's a little iffy sometimes getting through there.
Yeah. I always like those
Good question.
Cooper AT. I like those Cooper AT3 tires myself. I was always a fan of those for my trucks.
But no winter tires. You don't need winter tires out here. You don't
Yeah,
really
you said
get that much
it's
winter.
largely
It doesn't
dustings and snow.
It doesn't pack
Right.
down. It just, at worst, it becomes ice, and it ain't going to matter if you have snow tires on ice.
Yeah.
So we usually use snow tires up north, where you get packed down snow that stays for weeks on the road. We don't have any of that here. It melts off pretty quickly.
Well, Western, is there any we're coming up on the finish line here. Is there any parting thoughts you'd like to give us? I know I've really enjoyed this. I believe the chat has truly enjoyed this. They've brought up some very interesting questions. Is there any parting thoughts for us? Anything else you'd like to add? I know like I said, I've really enjoyed this, and I don't believe I'm ever going to leave Appalachia, but you've really put a good sales pitch on Ozarkia. I have to say, it sounds like a nice place. Absolutely. Any last words, final thoughts you got?
Yeah, I thank you for the preemptive lead up. Give me a little time to collect myself there. That's very professional of you, Southern Knight. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Look at you, Mr. Podcast. That's awesome. Episode 31, and you're doing handoffs like that. That's awesome. Yeah, man. This has really meant a lot to me. This move for my family, this community that we've built. I see it as the path forward. And if it's not Ozarkia, if it's not my intentional community, if it's not Ozarkia, I would just really posit that I hope each and every person listening to this really thinks through how this is the right formula. It's the right recipe. It's consolidating people like us into an intentional community. It doesn't have to be our specific intentional community. I would love if it was Ozarkia, but wherever you go, back northwest, Maine, wherever you find that, you got to find other people of like mind to not only live as friends, but to raise your children together. And so my call to action is a couple of things. Really think through why it is that you're staying where you're at. Who are you there for? What job is going to matter in relation to the outcome of how your kids are raised? How many friends do you have that you can have over with your kids and their kids, and you can speak openly and honestly about things? How often are you able to do that right now? How many family members can you do that with? Right?
Yeah.
And you start to think, okay, even let's say there's some people who've got they've got parenting down, and they're raising their kids the right way, and they somehow make it to adulthood without all the negative influence that they get every time they leave the house. Because let's face it, you can't control what's outside the house. You can't control what's on their cell phones, right? Who are your kids going to marry? Who's going to extend your bloodline into the infant, into the future? And for me, that was one of the core questions I dwelt on, I meditated on, I thought on through a lot of hikes, a lot of windshield time. How am I going to ever raise my kids to be the people that I want them to be? And then what community are they going to have, and the quality of those relationships, and who are they going to marry? And if you really boil down to what we are doing here at Ozarkia, Hammer with his main thing, some guys I know and enjoy up in the Pac Northwest, they are consolidating a gene pool at the very core of people that are able. There's a whole lot of layers, right? They have to have the self-preservation instinct to see through the propaganda they've been given their entire life. A psyop that surpasses anything that's ever happened in human history, right? In European history.
Yes.
you've seen through that. Great. Well, for our intentional community, were you able to secure a wife while living those values? All right. That's another heuristic, because it ain't easy. I'm not
Yeah.
stating that it's easy to go find a quality wife, but there are men that have done it despite the odds. Okay.
Yeah.
You've done that. Well, have you created white life? Have you created another generation of whites in your bloodline, in our collective bloodlines, to further on our cause and our people? All right. And I know that's unfair to other people. There are people that don't fit into those requirements for us specifically, right? But what I'm trying to do is, if they're the type of men and women that, despite everything against us, have still arrived at that position, that place in life, well, man, I'm interested to talking to you. I'm interested to get to know you. I'm interested to see if you're someone who would be a good fit. But I'll also posit this: if you're not a good fit for us, and most people aren't, I'm just going to be honest, we're pretty picky.
I think you
Right?
have to be. I think you have to be
I think you have
selective.
to be.
You really do.
We're pretty picky. But if it's not us, and even if you never reach out to us, please, please, please really consider forming your own intentional community in the Ozarks. I'd ask, but even if not, somewhere. Do
Yeah.
not stay and live your life and raise your kids in this degeneracy and this filth that, I don't care how good of a parent you are, it's going to seep in.
It
That
does.
once you lose their minds, you've lost, and you're going to have a non-white grandkid, or you're going to have a homosexual or tranny son. I know a lot of people in our circles that still try to cope about public schools. Well, my wife's got to work, yada. There's all these excuses, man. And I'm like, all right, it's just, you're increasing the odds that you're going to have a non-white grandkid or a homosexual or tranny kid. And
Yeah.
to me, there's
That's
no amount of money
unfortunately the
worth that.
truth. No. Fuck
So
no.
if this message, if what people have heard today, if it makes sense to you, if what I'm saying is in line what you've already been thinking, reach out to us on Telegram. Our channel is at Ozarkia, Ozarkia. And my admin if you want to just chat with us and see if you might be a good fit for us, it's at Ozarkia_admin. That's the place where you can reach out to us and chat with us. And just to be clear too, the vetting and all the stuff that goes on, it's not just me making that decision. Every person that has relocated their family out here, every man gets a say in whether or not we pass someone. So it's not always my judgment that prevents someone from joining us. It is a collective effort. This is not a top-down hierarchy. We want peers.
Yeah.
We want capable people who are actually going to make a difference in their own families first, and then secondarily within our intentional community. So that's what I put out there. I so appreciate you giving me this platform and this audience to speak. I have wanted to chat with you for quite a few months, and it has been as enjoyable a conversation as I hoped it would be.
I've really enjoyed it as well, man. I got to admit to you, I feel like you've carried me in this stream, to tell you the truth. I'm really glad that you agreed to come on. I've really enjoyed this, and it appears that everyone in the chat has really enjoyed it as well. It's like I said, man. My heart is in Appalachia, but man, you make the Ozarks sound like a beautiful place. I mean, it's beautiful. It sounds like what you've got going on over there, and it sounds like it's successful. And this is what I think. This is what I'm in favor of. One of the purposes of my channel, this idea of what I mentioned earlier, the cold revolution, self-reliance, trying to be self-reliant. And it's good to have your friends online and stuff, but you can easily be fooled by people online. To get the measure of a man, I truly believe that you have to meet them in person, shake their hand. And what you have here, you're building a tribe, you could say. That's what you're doing. You are building your own tribe, and that's a beautiful thing. Absolutely.
And I will guarantee you that if someone makes it through the vetting process enough to us giving you an invitation to come out and visit us, you will not be disappointed in the families out here. This will
That's
not
awesome.
be like a lot of your experiences within this cause. These are fit, attractive, wholesome families, the kind that you want to build a community around. And that is why we are so strict on the types of requirements that we have, because we don't want you to show up, spend all the time, money, and resources to even just come visit us, right?
Yeah.
And then just show up and be like, ugh, this is It's a low
This
quality
is a
group
letdown.
of people. Yeah, something that your wife wouldn't be happy about, right? You convince her to go visit these racially conscious people that are taking positions that are taboo in the mainstream. You finally convince her to make the long trip out here. Yeah, I can promise you she'll be happy. She'll leave and say, "Man, I'm so surprised. These are normal people. These are people we would want to hang out with where we were." And I know I can't impress that to you by posting pictures because I gotta, retain everyone's anonymity and their security. But I can make you that promise. You won't be disappointed if you visit.
Oh yeah, damn right.
And you're always
Well,
welcome out here, Mr. Nordic. You are welcome to come visit
I'd
us
like to.
anytime you got the chance to.
Oh man, I'd love to check it out. I'd like to come out there and visit y'all, and maybe do a little fly fishing myself, and maybe hunt some of that ginseng. Hopefully, I wouldn't be poaching on anybody's land, though. I wouldn't do that. But anyways,
I
yeah,
love the
thank
title,
you
man.
again.
Ginseng Dreams, Ozark Streams. Love it.
Yeah, yeah. My dad thought this was a good title for it when I told him about the stream. But anyways, guys, I want to thank everybody that's came by, and hope y'all have a wonderful day. I've got to hit the road here shortly. Got to get some raw milk. It's probably going to take me a little over an hour to get up there to my friend's farm, but I want to thank you again, Western Masculine. Good luck with your project, and I hope this stream uh, is able to help you advance your goals. You could say.
Thank you. I believe it will, and I believe the people that are attracted to your stream are the type of people we want to talk to.
All
So
right,
thank you. Again,
I hope
appreciate it.
so.
It's an honor.
Thank you again, and guys, I may have a stream lined up for Saturday with my Bulgarian friend. I'll just have to see about a time for that, and I should have a video uploaded tomorrow. But I want to thank everybody again that came. I want to thank our guest. And if you're interested in Ozarkia, I put the links in the description box below. Just look at it there and click it. And hail victory, absolutely. And I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a great day or not, whichever part of the world you're in. Bye bye.